listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. We bring expertise on international affairs from Stanford's campus straight to you. I'm Michael McFaul, host of World Class and director of the Freeman Spogli Institute. Across Belarus for the last 2 weeks, protesters have taken to the streets to demonstrate against the Belarusian government and President Alexander Lukashenko, who claims to have won the country's last presidential election in early August with 80% of the vote. Exit polling, however, demonstrated that opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya actually garnered wide popular support. The images and videos of mass demonstrations in Belarus are genuinely inspiring to anyone who believes in democracy. Most certainly for me personally, they have been inspiring. But the situation is also precarious, as Lukashenko might be tempted to try to crack down. And of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin is looming in the wings. To help us understand these amazing events, my guest today is Ales Latvinets, a scholar and activist in Belarus. He teaches politics at the European Humanities University, a Belarusian university in exile in neighboring Lithuania. From 2012 to 2016, he was a deputy chair of the Movement of Freedom, and in 2017, he became a founder and council member of DEA, a civic initiative group in Belarus. Ales also ran as a candidate in parliament and local elections in Belarus in 2016. And he is an alumnus of our Draper Hills Summer Fellows Program at the Center for Democracy Development and Rule of Law here at the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford University. Fantastic that we could find you given all the events going on. Welcome to the podcast, Ales.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege for me to be invited and to share my views and to talk about my country, which is a kind of hotspot for international attention right now.
Hotspot indeed. First of all, let's just start with some basic facts. Can you explain to our listeners what were the events leading up to this situation that then triggered these massive demonstrations?
Well, we have a very peculiar political system, an authoritarian, consolidated authoritarian regime with a ruler, President Lukashenko, who is in power for 26 years. And he relied mostly for his rule on rigging elections, but also on very generous Russian support. He used to have a strong charisma as well. For many years, he kept power thanks to that. And this year, few pundits expected it would be a difficult election for him or self-reappointment.
I love that phrase. Let's focus on that. Self-reappointment. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
Keep going.
We are not a monarchy. It's not, absolutist rule like in 18th century. There are elections, or what is called elections in Belarus. As a candidate in elections, I know that, the whole process is controlled by the executive, and the figures they produce, they are very far from reality, because there is strict control on electoral commissions, and mostly, 99% loyal people are members of the commissions, and they produce a result that are put from the top to them, and that's it. During early elections, especially in 2006 and 2010, there were protests, and also large-scale protests, unsuccessful. But Lukashenko managed to stay in power, and this year it didn't work for him. He's still in power, but surely we have a completely new situation in Belarus right now. Why now? There are a few explanations, and people talk about kind of fatigue of the dictatorial rule, and the generations are changing. He came to power with slogans, very pro-Soviet slogans, post-imperial slogans of restoring the old regime. And he reintroduced state control over enterprise. Up to 70% of our economy is still state-run. And there is ideological control. And he was the one in 94, he was the one who said that I'm ready to go to Russia even on my knees. And he launched this saga of the so-called fraternal integration with Russia. And surely it provided benefits for him, because thanks to subsidized price for oil and gas, he could redistribute, have a system, a more egalitarian system, social system in Belarus than, for example, in Ukraine or in Russia. So this was also one of the resources of the regime, and one of the explanation of why it lasted so long. But finally, this year, there were a few other events that concurred, also were factors that contributed to the weakening of his position. First is the way he handled the coronavirus crisis. So he mishandled it. And he accused people for being responsible themselves. He talked about psychosis as not as a threat, but he talked about things that it is imposed from above, and we should not care. We should care about our economy. And he offered solutions that were really appalling, and people were especially, and it was mostly backbone electorate. So people from small cities, people in the rural areas, he lost much of his legitimacy over there. And there is another factor related to this so-called integration with Russia. Well, he launched himself this project of union state with Russia, but finally, for a year and a half, he tried to oppose the Russian claims to finally for Belarus being incorporated into Russia, because we remember almost 2 years ago, in December, the then Russian Prime Minister Medvedev talked about the roadmaps and about next steps towards integration, and he talked about common customs, common fiscal policy, common currency also, and finally about creating supranational institutions. And Lukashenko tried to oppose it, but anyway, he always played a kind of cat and mouse with Russia, because he is very dependent upon Russian support. Russia for almost entire of his rule, and maybe we are witnesses this right now, was a hegemonic protector of Lukashenko, because his regime faced Western sanctions, because it's not for the first time that the election results is rigged. It is regularly, unfortunately, rigged in Belarus, and the following 2006 election, following 2010 elections, there were also Western sanctions against Lukashenko's regime. And discontent, his loss of legitimacy, created the background for unexpected mobilization of people. And there were new candidates. Some of them coming from inside the regime. Some hope was born, and nobody could expect such long queues of people waiting to give signature. Because just to understand, we have a kind of police state. It's impossible to have, almost impossible to have legal public rallies. You need to ask permission, you need to pay money, and any discontent is cracked by the riot police. So we have a police state, and for Belarusians, we used to have, in 2011, for example, we used to have a kind of silent protest, that even silent people were arrested, put to prison. In 2017, it was the same. People were not very happy with the law on so-called social parasites, so people who were not working and who had to pay tax. And people went to the streets. Once again, there was it was a strength of the regime. They tried to fragmentate and also to use targeted repressions. So the regime hit once again in 2017, and the fact that people just silently taking, in the context of coronavirus still hitting hard Belarus, people taking silently queues and waiting for just to sign in for an alternative candidate, it was really very new. And what he did in the wake to the election, two major candidates, one was not prevented even to run as a candidate, another one gathering signatures, Sergei Tikhanovsky, another one was arrested, Viktor Babarika, who was arrested apparently on the fake claims that he was responsible for tax evasion and so on. He used to be head of the local branch of Gazprombank here in Belarus. So two major candidates being arrested, and another one was disqualified because of the signatures. So one needs to submit 100,000 signatures, at least 100,000 signatures to be nominated as a candidate. And finally, they decided that the wife of a political prisoner, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, would not be very dangerous for them. And it was a really very amazing situation when the discontent was so high that people were ready to vote whomever, but not him. There were three other candidates whose campaigns were not so visible. So the major struggle was between Tikhanovskaya and a person whose humanity was very obvious, and who also many people had compassion towards her, a mother of two kids with a husband being in prison, and her message was very calm and very, to some extent, elementary, but understandable to people. She said that I understand. Well, I didn't want to go into politics, but I have to run for the sake of my family, but also for the sake of my larger family of Belarus, because we need to change the country and we need to have new elections, there was an agreement between disqualified, not registered candidates and herself. We need a new election. We need also the full release, the end of political repression, release of political prisoners, and new election with the presence of international observers, because for the first time the regime didn't invite, providing as a reason the coronavirus situation, so they didn't invite international observers. In case of Belarus, the OSCE observers. These were very simple program points from her, but tension was so high and people were not so unsatisfied with the situation that they voted for her. And there was a very good initiative, Golos, which was created. There was an online platform for people registering and then providing copies of their ballots. And it was a very good move, asymmetric move, because it was a very good tool for gathering information from directly from citizens about how they voted. Because, you talked in the introduction about exit polls. Well, we don't have exit polls institutions, independent institution in Belarus, because it is prohibited by the regime. And what we could have following the election, that several commissions, across the country, Belarus is a country of 9.5 million people, and across the country there are 70,000 electoral commission members. And some electoral commissions, and especially when there were observers, some electoral commissions provided results that were quite the opposite of what the regime claimed. And at some polling stations where, with honest commission members, the Svetlana Tikhanovskaya had 70-80%, just the opposite of what Lukashenko claimed. And it was outstanding proof of the scale of the rigging of falsifications that the regime did. And we still have discuss in Belarus audios or videos, recordings from commission members, or even from the sessions or discussions between different commission members about how the local authorities put pressure on them to provide the needed results.
Right.
And so it really triggered this protest, and people, and even more when the campaign started in June. We have an extraordinary mobilization of people, because many of them say enough is enough.
Thank you so much. That's a fantastic description of how we got to this moment. I want to just underscore a few things. So one, I think it's important for our listeners to remember that there was mobilization before Election Day, right? And there were these big demonstrations for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya before the Election Day. But two, thank you so much for explaining how citizens of Belarus knew that the election results were falsified. It was not exit polling, to be clear, but it was, one, the organization Golos helped to publish that, and two, there were some genuinely honest election commissioners that published the results that were at odds with the official results. I did not know that. That's very useful for us to hear. Tell us, Alice, once people knew that information, who organized the demonstrations? How was it spontaneous? Was there civic groups? How was it that you could have such massive demonstrations happen so quickly in your country?
Everybody knew that they have to protest. And there was also an understanding, and many people said that once 100,000 persons come out to the streets of Minsk, the dictator would be gone. Unfortunately, it did not happen, but people understood that people's power is just peaceful protest.
Right.
The day of the election and the next 2 days, there were huge problems with internet in Belarus.
Yes.
So the communication was very limited. And there were no kind of center that would mobilize the protest from within. Surely, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, as an alternative candidate, she invited people to protect their votes. but there were no direct calls from her to mobilize in a certain place. And what was really unusual, most information came through Telegram messenger channels.
Right.
And there is one very popular, the most popular channel is Nexta, somebody. Well, Nexta means in Belarusian somebody. Young person in his 20s, a young journalist from who resides now in Poland, who made a very good film on Lukashenko's rule half a year ago. And it was very popular among young people. One might say he is of the same age as Lukashenko's rule. So he's 20, 25. He made a good film for people of his age about the regime. Well, for people of long day engagement and, political participation like me, there were nothing new.
Right.
But for younger generation that went to the schools with ideological control by the regime, that didn't have easy access and were not looking for alternative information, because one has also to bear in mind, public media in Belarus, where state-run television and radio are completely dominated by the regime. And
right.
there are no alternative. If you look for alternative information, it's possible to find it, but you need to put more efforts. There is an independent TV channel, Belsat. There is Radio Liberty. There is a number of other media outlets. But it turned out that most recent information about where to gather, what to do, went from this Nexta Telegram channel. At the beginning of the campaign, it seems to me that he had 500,000 subscribers right now, and there are two channels, Nexta Live and Nexta. The Nexta Live has 2 million subscribers. We have 7 million voters in Belarus. It means from 1/4 to 1/3 of voters of electorate in Belarus are following what is happening in the country through this Telegram channel. And another one, which is Nexta, has it seems to me 900,000 subscribers. This is why the regime immediately, prior to in the week to the election, they launched an attack against bloggers and against also the owners of other Telegram channels who were living in Belarus. Right now, Igor Losik, for example, we have another Telegram channel, the Belarus of the Brain. He is in prison. And another way of communicating was, to a lesser extent now, but prior to the election, in the wake of the, during the campaign, were YouTube channels as well. Through YouTube, and it also, thanks to YouTube, that Sergei Tikhanovsky, the imprisoned husband of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, became so popular. So YouTube, where you provide, as an individual, through your own eyes, you provide some political information and you share information. It's understandable to the same-minded fellow citizens and so on. Right now, we have up to 20 persons, bloggers, or administrators of Telegram channels who are in prison, and they are criminally prosecuted. There were no trials yet, but they are all in prison right now. And it explains that regime belatedly, but the regime understood what is the strength of the bloggers and Telegram channels. This is why they cut internet, and it was almost impossible to have direct access to many media and also to download information through Telegram channels. But many Belarusians used me as well, used circumvention tools like Tor browser or Siphon, which helps to circumvent the censorship. And I myself, I managed on August the 9th, the 10th and 11th, mostly of the day, thanks to Siphon application, I managed to have at least access to Telegram channels. And apparently many Belarusians as well. As far as I understand, there were over 1 million downloads of a Siphon application from Belarus, and people use it.
That's incredible. Incredible how technology comes together with people's preferences. There is a debate in the West about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that there's not a single charismatic leader inside Belarus right now. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, of course, is in Lithuania. What do you think of that question, Alice? Is it a positive thing that there's not one leader, or is it a negative thing?
Well, it might be maybe helpful, but we have what we have. And the decentralization of the protest helped to spread it.
Right.
Because the regime is still consolidated. Its grip upon the so-called power bloc, the law enforcement agencies, is still strong. There were some defections,
right? I wanted to ask you that. Are there any signs of divisions within the Siloviki or within Mr. Lukashenko's government, or not yet?
Well, some signs, especially from the middle range officials. There were a number of officers from police who resigned and did it even openly. Right. There is solidarity fund created by Belarusians, by some businessmen, especially from IT companies, and they have already $1.5 million for those who would not accept the regime's policies and would leave the law enforcement agencies.
Right.
And apparently, I looked for the information. They said that up to 300 persons applied for them for assistance. There are some movements and people, especially middle range. We don't have at the level of ministers, the situation is unchanged for the regime. But so at the lower level, we have a number of people. For example, in the city of Lida, there was a colonel. He was head of the local police, and he resigned, and he wrote an open letter. There is also a person that seems to be yesterday who left Belarus, but he was arrested in Russia and brought back to Belarus. He is from the investigation committee as well. He resigned. So we have such a number. Well, it's difficult what the exact number, but still.
Alice, I know that you've been at the demonstrations, including the tremendously giant, large demonstration last Sunday. Can you tell our listeners just a little bit about what it feels like on the streets to see all those people together? I'd be curious just to understand your emotional reaction. We've been talking very analytically now. Now I'd like to ask you just about what it feels like to be in such amazing events in your country.
I had tears in my eyes because it was so unexpected. You know, I traveled a lot abroad. And coming back to Belarus, I was surprised that people are very sad and not looking each other into eyes. I saw yesterday and before a different situation, because people were, well, we know that there were repressions. People were beaten while there was undeclared war of the regime against its own people. And they used stun grenades, gas, they used water cannons, and they tortured people. And we have many, many witnesses over their stories. Despite all that, people were happy, glad to see each other. And there were so huge crowds. And with the national flags, white, red, white flags, which are different because Lukashenko uses former Soviet symbols. I was with my family. We have 2 sons of 4 years and 4 months, and we were there. There were many people with young kids as well. Just beside us, there was a pregnant woman, and it was so inspiring. And we had this feeling that we are not a minority, we are majority. And we are facing a very hostile and unfortunately aggressive and unfortunately armed minority, which protects the dictator. One could barely see a policeman in the city center, and people were self-organized. Everything was clean. People were positive to each other, and it was really so amazing. There were people with water, people suggesting even some snacks, and it was so inspiring. And we felt that we have the power. Being together, we have the power, and this is really emotionally very strong because there are ups and downs, and when we see crackdowns, when we see the dictator together with his riot police, and each day we hear new information about people being arrested. Just today, 2 persons were from the coordination council that were arrested and maybe already tried, and some people from factory strike committees were also arrested or even disappeared. So when we hear all the time this information, we know that it can hit at any moment. But still people peacefully gather and show that they do not agree. This is really strong. Belarus has changed. And I cannot predict when the regime would be gone. The country has changed. And one of the reasons why people were very unhappy with the regime, because from 2010, we didn't almost have any economic growth. So the country stagnated. The regime tried to create kind of consumers, but not citizens. Just you can consume, but forget about politics. And now we have both. Well, from consumers, my fellow Belarusians are becoming truly citizens because they know that their rights, their property was stolen by the regime. People of different age, that were positive to each other and expecting for the better and understanding that they run a risk, but they are ready to take this risk. And even if the regime becomes even more military dictatorship and there is another brutal crackdown, well, some people think about fleeing the country, but I know that there are many Belarusians that would stay, and they would, even if they leave Belarus, they would do their best to change our country for better. And this is very important.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That was very nice to hear, given the history of your country and your own history, by the way, in struggling against this regime. So the last question, which I know you cannot answer, but what happens next? What do you think are the next moves that we'll see from Mr. Lukashenko and from the opposition?
Well, Lukashenko promises anyway that he would, and unfortunately he has some proofs in his record that he would use any force to protect his power. He has also, to some extent anyway, he can rely on Putin. Right. And still there is, my late friend Vitaly Selitsky wrote about authoritarian international. So Lukashenko survived thanks to support from Russia. And you know, both Russian and Chinese leaders, the Chinese was the first to congratulate Lukashenko with the victory, and then went Putin. Lukashenko and Putin several times, even today. There are already some consultants and at least TV presenters from Russia, because we have people from national television completely controlled by the regime, but the people couldn't bear anymore, and they resigned. Many of them were fired, and the regime invited the Russian TV presenters. The Belarusians speak Russian, but a bit different Russian, and it's possible to hear that these presenters come from Russia. It's highly likely that there are some consultants, Russian consultants, political consultants, but also some people, advisors that would work closely with the KGB, which has not changed the name, or with Defense Ministry. A month ago, we have a new prime minister who represents exactly the so-called VPK, the military-industrial complex. And we have a kind of militarization of Belarus. And it might continue. This is the worst scenario. Well, the best scenario, it would be that Lukashenko resigns and we have a new election without him. And the democratic change happens, and Belarus becomes a parliamentary republic, and we continue to implement democratic reforms. And something in between, there is a coordination council, as the international community calls the regime, for the dialogue with the opposition. Well, there might be kind of a dialogue with, maybe the regime would accept the dialogue with the opposition. For now, there is no talk. They do not accept at all. Right, and right. Lukashenko, from the very beginning, said we don't need any dialogue and so on. If strikes of factories continue, if there is still mobilization, and we expect, many people expect that in fall, there would be a huge economic crisis in the country, because Russia does not provide the same subsidies to the regime as it used to be. Lukashenko might try to, in exchange for his own rule, might accept more concessions to Russia and actually to accept him being a kind of governor of Russia for keeping his power. There might be kind of a dialogue, but he is a person, the ruler himself, he is a person that is not negotiable. It's right. Impossible for him, knowing that he would anyway try to keep his grip on power and to do everything. And he promised many things during his 26-year rule. Even to Russia, he didn't deliver. It's very important to continue mobilization. It's very important, to help people and to really unite people and have more solidarity at the local level. And still, there is an expression, all politics is local, but we in Belarus, we don't have any legitimate government. All the council appointed by the regime. So we need to have a legitimate body, maybe the Coordination Council would become a legitimate body that would represent the majority of the society, and progressively we would be putting more pressure, always within the peaceful resistance. Hopefully the regime would make more mistakes and it would become even more isolated. And anyway, a condition for successful change is a split within the power bloc. Unfortunately, we don't have it yet. We have Interior Minister and Defense Minister who are very loyal to the ruler. And yesterday, the Defense Minister promised that the army would be in the streets to protect the so-called constitutional order.
Well, it sounds like there's lots more drama to come. And we hope, Alice, that you'll help us understand those future dramas. and we can have you come back to our podcast and help us, because today's been a fantastic discussion. Speaking for myself personally, I am very inspired by the actions of the citizens of Belarus. I know that you have been involved in this struggle for many, many years, and it's a delight for me to at least see these moments today when the fruits of your work over years are now being manifested on the streets of Belarus. So thank you for that. Thank you for spending so much time with us at a very busy time in your country. And we hope you'll come back again to update us on events that are happening in Belarus.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And keep looking and following what is happening in Belarus. It's very important because people in other countries get inspiration from what is happening in Belarus and lessons as well. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. If you like what you're hearing, please review us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to know your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever you're listening to stay up to date on what's happening in the world and why.